It's the holidays, so let's touch on a game I got one Christmas, gave away to a friend and instantly regretted it, and never got to see again until many years later at a chance encounter at a flea market. This is Star Wars for the Nintendo Entertainment System, released in 1991 courtesy of JVC, Lucasfilm Games, and Beam Software. And kids, let's watch this incredible opening sequence. Now that is a hell of an opening, and a modestly decent 8-bit rendition of the opening moments of Star Wars, and yes, we're calling this Star Wars, not A New Hope. A New Hope is retroactively the one where Greedo shoots first, and that never happens here. Ever. Greedo just moves back and forth and takes a million hits to die, and he never fires back, not one bit, so just relax. This game also has Boba Fett, and it is Boba Fett, not generic Mandalorian hunter or something like that. And there are multiple Boba Fetts in this game that you can kill, which means this game is inadvertently the inspiration for Attack of the Clones. Oh dear, we're doomed. So the game proper begins with Luke Skywalker in his land speeder driving into a cave, where once he gets past all the dripping acid and platforming, he can upgrade his rinky-dink pea shooter left over from the Clone Wars into a rapid-fire killing machine. Or at least something resembling a proper laser blaster. From there, you're free to roam around the dune sea of Tatooine and explore the caves scattered throughout, or the sand crawlers situated in the northwest, or go southeast to that wretched hive of scum and villainy, otherwise known as the spaceport of Mos Eisley. Now, those familiar with the film know that the Sandcrawler is where Luke gets the droids from, and the Mos Eisley Cantina is where Han Solo awaits prospective clients and where Greedo never shoots ever. And then for kicks, one of these caves is where you'll find old Ben Kenobi, where he'll give Luke the lightsaber that once belonged to his father, Jake Lloyd. That last part may be a bit of a stretch, but I digress. Now here's the real interesting bit, because the Dune Sea is essentially one open world. You're free to do whatever the hell you want. Do you go out and recover R2 from the Sandcrawler, or do you leave him at the mercy of the Jawas? Do you seek out Obi-Wan or Han to aid you on your journey that you just happen to be going on because... just cuz? Or do you say screw him and go on without him? Star Wars doesn't force you to do any of this stuff. After the opening cave, Luke can just roll on over to Docking Bay 94 and fly off this rock with the Millennium Falcon. What, you think Chewie's gonna care? He doesn't even care enough to show up anywhere in the game. What does he care if some whiny farm boy steals their ship? Hell, you don't even need to save the princess if you're not feeling it. Go on and leave her behind and let her meet her demise when you blow up the Death Star eventually at the end of the game. Whatever floats your boat, man. I just don't care. In any case, your overall progress is gauged by a completion percentage that is increased by finding said allies and weapons, and as well as just going through the game's multiple levels and completing certain tasks. Obviously, you want to go for the full 100%, but since there's only one ending with minor tweaks, it's your call if you wish to follow the movie as the game allows, or just go ahead and write your own special edition. When you start the game, your only playable character is Luke Skywalker, armed with a blaster that can be upgraded to a much better blaster, and eventually he could gain a lightsaber that, while limited in range, can kill almost any enemy in the game in a single hit, thus making this the most effective lightsaber in the history of ever. In a few cases where enemies happen to be impervious to pain, saber blows will cause Luke to bounce back, which is never a good thing, especially if the bounce back directs you to a pit or lower level, which can also be pretty fatal. Eventually, if you so choose, you could also get Han Solo and Princess Leia as additional characters by visiting him at the Cantina and at the Death Star respectively. Han has a stronger blaster while Leia has better jumping. Since only Luke is allowed to have extra lives, up to 7 max, both characters essentially only have one life, so if they die, they're gone for good unless you go back to where you found them originally, or you call on Obi-Wan to bring them back to life a number of times, assuming he's part of your party, that is. Saving R2-D2 from the Sandcrawler will grant you access to maps on the Death Star, as well as repair your X-Wing near the end of the game. In addition to the standard platforming segments, there are 3 instances where you'll either be in the cockpit or gunner turret of a ship. These instances being navigating the Millennium Falcon through the remnants of the destroyed Alderaan system, fending off TIE fighters during the Falcon's escape from the Death Star, and the eventual raid on the Death Star itself in your X-Wing starfighter. In these cases, colliding with asteroids or green peas will damage your shields, and once your ship eventually explodes, it's game over. That's it. That's all. Your multiple lives do not come into play here, and while you do not lose your extra lives when dying in these segments, one shot and it's game over is still a bitter pill to swallow. Needless to say, there is a reason the game gives you a seemingly generous 10 continues, and it's not because the game wants to give you a sporting chance. And unlike Luke's multiple lives, you can't get more continues, so once those 10 continues are all wasted, that's it. Game over. Oh, and speaking of shields, be sure to pick up these Falcon shields while on Tatooine, because if you don't, well, you're not going to last long in that Alderaan asteroid field. People will balk at this blatant attempt at artificially lengthening the game or toughening it up needlessly, but honestly, I call it currency for surviving your trip to Alderaan. Hey, smugglers flying hunks of junk need to make a living somehow, and if you can't afford to pay in credits, you may as well pay in shields. It's only fair. Collecting shields only applies to the Alderaan segment, however. The later gunnery and X-Wing levels gives you full shields for absolutely free. Star Wars has a bit of a learning curve when it comes to its controls, and Beam tried to pack in as much as they could within the confines of the NES controller. You could jump, you could shoot left or right, you could climb ladders, you could duck, and you could also run by holding down the B button in order to get longer leaps. Knowing how to run and jump and shoot is a necessity to progress in this game, especially during the more platform-heavy segments. There are also these chutes that will propel you to higher levels, as well as the conveyors that will shoot you in a direction which you could use to power your jumps even further and reach higher platforms. Also, be mindful of drops. If you take a bit of a plummet below, the screen will shake and you'll suffer a bit of damage depending on the fall. This is perhaps the most painful and detrimental penalty in Star Wars that may steer players away from this game, aside from collisions with enemies that also tend to be pretty painful. However, like any game, it's all about learning the way things work and working around them. And while Star Wars might be tough at times, it's still pretty firm and fair and eventually conquerable. Like any game based on that first Star Wars movie, the final moments of Star Wars the game has you piloting your X-Wing down the Death Star Trench Run, a hazardous little top-down scrolling shooter thing where you avoid towers, shoot down TIE fighters, and hopefully land a torpedo down the exhaust port, which is significantly larger than 2 meters. And if you missed the first time, don't worry about it, you'll get to play the whole level over again to try a second time, and a third time, and a fourth time, and you get the idea. So when it comes to the main characters of Star Wars, the graphics don't do them proper justice. You could sort of make out the basic designs and stuff, but Luke looks like he's wearing a helmet, Leia looks somewhat awkward, and Han looks scrawny. However, the rest of the sprite work is fairly decent. Stormtroopers look like stormtroopers, Jawas look like Jawas. If it's a familiar alien or character, they look the part somewhat, and even some of the original creature designs are of decent quality. Backdrops are detailed and varied, aside from the numerous caves that you have to explore, and when it comes to the gunnery segments, they did the best they could and it looks fine for the most part. Cutscenes in general look alright for the most part. Either static images of the cast, which, looks pretty decent, or some minor animation bits, which, it's okay. Star Wars on the NES opens with a rather upbeat and somewhat bombastic rendition of the classic Star Wars theme, but for the most part, while the game does offer some unique renditions of some classic Star Wars tunes, the game mostly serenades you with some more original music, which is actually pretty decent. Nothing particularly memorable, mind you, but it's not bad. The sound effects are a mixed bag of sorts. Lots of high-pitched laser shots might be grating for some, but at least the explosion sound effect is very satisfying. That is, whenever it's allowed to play, that is. Overall, Star Wars is a solid offering of Star Wars gaming on the NES and is perhaps the best of the 3 NES efforts based on the franchise. With multiple characters to play with, a variety of playstyles, and some solid presentation, what you have here is a take on the 1977 movie that does the material justice while putting its own unique spin on things. That having been said, however, the difficulty curve and some of the minor quirks might make Star Wars imposing, especially for less than experienced players. Definitely not a game to be taken lightly, and, well, in terms of overall Star Wars games, there are definitely better out there. But as far as the NES is concerned, this is perhaps the closest you can get to a definitive Star Wars experience on the console, and is definitely one game worth checking out.